Hey everyone, and welcome back to my new series, My Thoughts, where I'll be covering my thoughts on all of the current projects that have come through the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Phase 4. Of course, we're starting with the Disney Plus series, and we're working backwards. Of course, last time I talked about She-Hulk. Actually, the day I'm recording this is the day that my She-Hulk video is going live. So I really don't know what the response is going to be to that. I hope it's positive. If you enjoyed it again, I sincerely appreciate you guys checking out my content and returning. If not, I again encourage you to place your feedback in the comments section. Let me know what I can do better, what you want to see changed, or if you want me to, talk about something else or cover something else. Today we are moving on to Miss Marvel. Now, Miss Marvel, the series as a whole, I think is probably the one of the more divisive series out of all of the current Phase 4 projects that have come through Disney Plus. And again, I think it sort of has a similar fate that She-Hulk had, but we will cover that. But I think it's important to start off by saying that Miss Marvel herself is an extremely important character in the comics. She first appeared in 2013, so compared to a lot of the other characters that we've seen in this Phase 4 and even just more recently in Marvel films in general, she's relatively new. And one of the things that appeals to majority of people about her is that she's a younger hero. Of course, for those of you who may not know, that is one of the main reasons why Peter Parker's Spider-Man is such a beloved character, is because he was younger, and at the time, younger kids who were reading the comics really related to him. And that was sort of the goal with Miss Marvel, but not only that, she also is the first Muslim female superhero to headline her own comic book. So she did a lot for representation of Muslims around the world with this comic book, and so she's important to a lot of people for that. It's the same reason why Black Panther really is important to a lot of people around the world, because he was one of the first and most popular main black superheroes. Not only that, she's also just an extremely important character in the modern Avengers. If you look at a lot of the current projects outside of the MCU, Miss Marvel is one of the more featured characters. I think that the Marvel brand is really trying to push her as a hero, and again, it's because she's popular. She is someone who a lot of children can, sort of see themselves in, and she's someone who, is just a funny, witty character like Spider Man, that, is just a great character to have in any story moving forward. And I really think that the overall purpose of this series was to try to introduce her, because I really do think that the fact that she's such a young character and she's not as well known as a Spider-Man yet per se means that she's going to be a major player moving forward. And that was really what this Disney Plus series had to do, is they had to find a way to establish her character for future use in the MCU. So like last time, I'm going to start with the pros and cons. I want to start off, and this is going to be very similar to She-Hulk in this regard, but I really loved Miss Marvel herself. Iman Vellani might have been the perfect casting. I mean, not only does she love the MCU in real life, but you can tell that she loves the MCU based on how she acts. Just within the series, she is passionate. You can tell that she has done research on Miss Marvel, the character. She comes into her own. Nothing feels awkward, which I think it goes to say, because I think with a lot of superheroes in general, some of them are weird, and some of them, have powers and different personality traits that can be very difficult to sort of grasp on screen. And I will say there have been some actors where I've sort of watched their performance and said, okay, you can definitely tell that they might not really know what the character is, or they're sort of just doing this, for the paycheck or to say that they're in the MCU. But I can't say that about Iman. She was absolutely phenomenal, And I really do hope we get to see more of her, not only because I think the Miss Marvel character is important, but also because I think she is just a phenomenal actress, and she really did the part justice. One of my other favorite parts of the series was the family dynamic of the Khan household. So I think it is very relatable to a lot of people to have, a goofy dad, a sort of stricter parent, whether that be your mom or your dad. Um, that was really perfectly captured in this series. And at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things that the series did is it showed that, despite all of these familial differences and, her mom not wanting her to go out and her dad trying to give her some leeway, but her rejecting all of her dad's approaches to things. I think that was a very relatable family dynamic for a lot of people, and I really think that they did a great job showing that in this series. I also really liked her brother. I think that they perfectly captured a relationship of an older sibling to a younger sibling. And again, just overall, I thought the family dynamic was one of the stronger pieces of the series overall. And one thing I know, which will probably be controversial, which I appreciated, is the way in which they described her power. So, in the comics, she's an Inhuman, and I'm not even going to touch the Inhumans with a 10-foot pole because who knows what's going on in the MCU with the Inhumans. If you ask me, I thought they were gone, and then Black Bolt appeared in Multiverse of Madness, so I really don't know what the future holds for the Inhumans. But the fact that they made Miss Marvel a mutant, I think is. I personally think that it's a great choice. I think that you are slowly seeing them introduce mutants, and of course, if you're not aware, the reason why we haven't seen the X-Men yet is there are some contractual issues from the previous X-Men movie about who gets to play the X-Men characters, and of course, the MCU wants to recast and get some new actors in to play some of the old classic X-Men characters. So for the time being, I think that until their contracts expire in, I believe, 2025, we're going to continue to have, certain people pop up around the MCU who will be mutants. Now, Miss Marvel being the first mutant, I don't think will last, and I think it's because, as has already been confirmed, Namor is going to be a mutant in Wakanda Forever. So I think he will have been the, actual first mutant because he's older than Kamala Khan is. But I think that her being the first real mutant that we get introduced to has some significance, and I really appreciated that because I think it would have been messy for them to try to explain her as an Inhuman or something like that. Now we get to the cons, and I have to say, I think the cons are more in depth than the pros. So I really thought that this series suffered from poor pacing. And this, I'll expand upon this more when I get to my next point. But just overall, it felt like some of the episodes dragged on, and I hate to say it, but majority of the episodes, it didn't really feel like there was a rhyme or reason for what was going on. It just sort of seemed like, again, they had to fill 6 episodes, so they were grasping at straws to find things to place here and there, and trying to introduce all these characters, and it didn't work. It didn't work, and I think this goes to my next point, which is that the villains in Miss Marvel were some of the worst, in my opinion, out of the entirety of the Disney Plus series that we've gotten in Phase 4. And I say that because you basically had 2 villains. You had Najma and the Clandestines, and then Damage Control. And I think that the Clandestines specifically, their plot went absolutely nowhere. They showed up, they wanted the bangle, then out of nowhere, Najma dies, and that's sort of it. And this, as someone who watched the series twice, I still really can't tell you what their overall motivation was. And I think that's an issue. I really wanted to like them. I really wanted to, connect with them as characters and sort of understand their motivations, but I didn't. I think it was because, again, they were so rushed and their whole plot just felt meaningless. And I hate saying that about a villain or a character, but their plot felt meaningless. And then Damage Control, I like the fact that Damage Control wasn't just sort of a cheap, cameo like, oh wow, we saw them in Spider-Man. It made sense that they were in there, but I did not like the fact that the clandestines were sort of set up as the main villain. They die off for the ultimate main villain to be Damage Control, and I really enjoyed the final episode. It's not my favorite episode, but I did enjoy it. And again, it just felt like, why was that needed? Why was the entirety of the last episode, the last conflict, needed? Again, I enjoyed it, but from a narrative standpoint, I don't really get why it was needed. And that brings me to the much larger point, which is, I don't think the series accomplished its goal of trying to introduce Miss Marvel. And this is something I think that we're seeing with some Disney Plus series, where I think it would have been better for Miss Marvel to simply appear in the Marvels movie and we maybe get a 5 to 10 minute backstory versus having this series. And I'll give you an example. Imagine if we had to have an entire Falcon series prior to meeting him in Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Now, I like Falcon. I know that for some reason a lot of people really think that his character is boring, and I guess I can see that to some degree, but, imagine if we had to have a series about him for, leading up into Winter Soldier. I don't know if having a series about Falcon would have added anything to his character, because everything we need to learn about his character was perfectly introduced within that little bit of time frame where we met him in Winter Soldier. Again, I really don't know what the plot of the Marvels is going to be, but depending on how that movie goes, I'd find it hard to imagine that the same thing could not be said for introducing Miss Marvel. Again, give her a 10-minute, sort of backstory somewhere in the movie and then roll on from there. I really didn't think we needed a whole 6-part series. Or they should have done a special like they did with Werewolf by Night, and I think that honestly moving forward we're going to see a lot more of those versus series. Now to my favorite and least favorite episode. My favorite episode was actually episode 1, Generation Y. And typically I don't think it's a good thing if the initial episode is your favorite episode, just because, again, that sort of shows you that after the first episode everything went downhill. And while I kind of agree with that with this series, I just think that the two most important things that this series did is that it first set up Bruno and Kamala's relationship. And I think that, they have a brother-sister dynamic, and that might be weird because most likely they're probably going to get together at some point in time in the series. But I really enjoyed how it sort of set up their dynamic, and I think besides that, the other thing that it did is it expanded the broader MCU and gave us context into how people feel about these heroes now. And I think it's important for us to know that people are treating these heroes like we treat them. They're treating them as celebrities. They're treating them as, again, superheroes. It's not a forgotten concept in their universe. And I thought the whole Avenger Con was a great insight into how people genuinely view people like Captain America, Hulk now, Ant-Man now, even people like Star-Lord. And again, I just thought overall it was a great episode. It was a great introduction to her powers. And again, I thought it really set up the story to go upwards, but to me it really didn't. And that leads me to my least favorite episode, episode 4, Seeing Red. And this is something I have an issue with in many of the Disney Plus series now, is that it just seems like certain characters are being introduced for no real purpose. And I sort of felt that way with Red Dagger. He sort of showed up, he played a very minor role, he fought Kamala Khan, and then he was sort of gone. Again, the whole plot with Najma, just it didn't go anywhere. The whole fight scenes just seem very unexciting, and I know that for a lot of people they're probably going to say most Marvel fight scenes seem unexciting, but this one was particularly bad, and again it just seemed to drag on. and there just did not seem to be a rhyme or reason for it. And I really hate saying that because, again, I really enjoy Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel as a character, but that episode in particular, I think, represents the much larger issue, which is it just dragged on. And with that being said, now here comes the ranking. And just to recap, we are ranking 7 Disney Plus shows. We're not including What If. And with that being said, I ranked She-Hulk 6th out of 7. I'm going to have to rank Miss Marvel 7 out of 7. Again, I really enjoy Miss Marvel as a character. I just think the series, quite frankly, might not have been needed. Depending on how the Marvels go, that will sort of give me my answer and will hopefully give you all your answer. But my feeling is that this could have been a special, or it could have just been completely scrapped and she could have been introduced within the next Marvels movie. And so again, I am ranking Miss Marvel 7th out of 7 out of the current Phase 4 Disney Plus shows. But anyways, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, share this video with a friend. And if you disagree with me, please leave your comments down below. If you agree with me, tell you what you agree about, or if there were points that you thought that I got right or that I missed. Again, I just want to start a conversation. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and come back next week when I talk about Moon Knight. I will see you all then.